Mukundan has received many honors including Vayalar Award, Sahitya Academy Award, Kerala Sahitya Academy Award, the Eruthachan Puraskaram, which is the highest literary honor of the government of Kerala, among many others. He has written over 19 novels and 13 short story collections, many of which have been widely translated into various Indian languages, English and French. His other major works include Keshavanta Vilapangal, Pravasam, and Mayari Puriyada Thirangalil. Welcome, sir. Next, we have our translators. Dr. Fathima EV is an award-winning writer, poet, and translator. Her translation of Subhash Chandran's book As a Professed Man was awarded the Crossword Book Award and the V. Abdullah Translation Award in 2017. Currently, she heads the Department of English at Krishna Menon Memorial Government Women's College, Kannur. Welcome. Nandakumar K started his career as a sub-editor at Financial Express. Strangely, his tryst with translation started with a paper in French on the blood diseases of fishes. He is now an impaneled copy editor with Indian publishers and IIM Ahmedabad. Welcome.
Thank you.
Shresh Tharoor is the best-selling author of 20 books, both fiction and non-fiction, besides being a noted critic and columnist. An Indian politician and former diplomat, currently serving as Member of Parliament for Thiruvananthapuram Technology Committee. He has won numerous literary awards, including a National Sahitya Academy Award, a Commonwealth Writers' Prize, and the Crossword Lifetime Achievement Award. And welcome to those who are attending this book launch. If you have any questions for the panel members, do leave them in the comments and we'll get to them by the end of the session. And so now I'll briefly introduce the star of the evening, which is the book. Can we all hold up the book, please? So this is Delhi, a soliloquy written by Mukundan, beautifully translated by Fathima EV and Nandakumar K. Also a word of appreciation to Priya Kurian, who designed the cover. It really captures the sentiments of the novel, very well. Oh, thank you. So talking about Delhi, this is just to introduce it to the audience, this is an ambitious, sprawling portrait of the city of Delhi and the Malayalis who came from the south of India to the capital city to make a living. So the book begins in the 1960s, and then we get a glimpse of Delhi for over 40 years. Mostly, this is through the eyes of Sahadevan. He's a young man in his 20s. He comes to Delhi for work, and then he lives there until he's an old man. So in Delhi, his friend and mentor, the person who helps the newcomer in the city, that is Shreedharanunni. He's a trade union leader. So in even the first chapter itself, we are taking a walk through Delhi in the 1960s because Shreedharanunni is cycling through the city. So we see that Delhi of the 1960s, there are railways, there are housing complexes, undeveloped areas, and I think even cauliflower fields and markets. So, and after that, we get acquainted with Sahadevan's friends and acquaintances, a huge group of friends and acquaintances. So what happens is these are the people who bear the brunt of the political developments that happen in the country. So that includes the Indo-China wars, the Indo-Pakistan wars, anti-Sikh riots, the emergency, all that. So it's definitely a fascinating read with a huge list of characters, and not just Malayalis, anyone who comes to Delhi and makes a home in Delhi. So this is a book which will appeal to all kinds of readers. For example, if you are a reader who likes stories of humans, you like following well-fleshed out characters, you like seeing their joy and trials and tribulations and all that, then this is the book for you. So on the other hand, if you are more of a picky reader, you like to take a step back and see how these political events impact the common man, then again, Delhi is like the perfect book for you. Now, if you do not fall into either of these categories, if you are like, an observer, like a visitor to a museum, then again, Delhi is the perfect book for you because you can see all the changes that happen in the city over a period of time, be it buildings or the changing housing conditions, transport, the financial capabilities, even the social fabric of the country. So, if you're someone who likes to read about things like that, again, this is really the book for you. So, what I am trying to say here is that Delhi is a book for everyone. You'll enjoy it, you'll think a lot about it. It is as much the city, as much the story of the common man as it is the story of a whole city. So, the book was originally published as Delhi Gavagar in 2011 when Mukundan was looking back and thinking about his life of living there and working in Delhi. So, Mukundan sir, can you share a few words about how this idea came into being?
Well, let me thank Westland and DC Books for arranging this wonderful event. And of course, I thank Shashi also with all my heart. And let me say only a few words. After that, we will discuss.
Sure.
So this novel is very close to my heart because almost everything I have narrated in this book comes from my experience, whatever I have seen or whatever I have heard. So when I set foot in Delhi, the Chinese aggression took place, and after that, very soon there were two wars with Pakistan, and again there was the declaration of emergency and Indiraji's assassination and the Sikh massacre. So whenever I witness a tragic event, I feel like writing about it. That's how I am. So if there are no tragic events, I won't write. There won't be writer, Mukundan. You won't be there. So these tragic events I wanted to write about, but usually I don't respond immediately. That is my nature. I need a period of gestation. So this novel was in gestation, I think almost for 15 years. And one day I told myself, enough. Now you have to start writing. So I got up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and with a cup of black tea, I started writing. That is the beginning. But very often I get stuck. I look at the screen of my laptop, nothing comes out. So I was worrying. Then, I had the idea. I told myself, let me try something. This is a secret I'm sharing with you. Then I had a little red wine. You take at 4 o'clock in the morning, you take red wine. It will ignite your imagination. this is a discovery I have made, and I share with you. Okay. So then I went on writing. It took almost 2 years to finish it. So I wanted to talk about only these tragic events which I mentioned. I also wanted to talk about the Malayali migrants in Delhi. I was one of them. Then you see, in those days, in the 60s, very few Malayalis made it to the top. Most of them, they were struggling, just like I have mentioned in this book. Then I wanted to do something else also. That was usually people have a rosy image about the city of Delhi, especially in Kerala. They think that is a beautiful city. Of course, it is beautiful. It is Connaught Place, but still there is another side of Delhi, dark side of Delhi. So I wanted to talk about this also. So there are these three things, the tragic events that took place, and the Malayali migration, and the dark, somber side of Delhi. So I wanted to talk about all these three. I don't know how far I have achieved this. I don't know, but when I wrote
You've
this novel,
100% succeeded.
succeeded. Yeah. So then, you see, when it came out in Malayalam, I think readers liked it. It was well received. Then I thought that this novel is for all the Delhi folk, not necessarily for Malayalis. So they should read this. So for that, the only way is to get the translation done. Then Fatima and Nandan came to my help. So the wonderful translation is there. So I am happy now. For the moment, I am happy. Usually, I am never happy, but for the moment, I am happy. How the non-Malayali readers receive this. Well, now I am
Thank you.
patiently looking forward to your comments and the audience if they have any questions. Well, that's all for the moment.
Yes, thank you, sir. So, Dr. Tharoor, you have been diligently reading the translation for the last week. Can you share your thoughts on the book and also officially flag off the launch?
Right. Well, I'm delighted to launch this book. I have known Mukundanji for quite some time. He's a writer of considerable distinction, of course, known first of all for his amazing writings about Mahe, the only French colony in Kerala, such as Mahe Puyode Tirangalil, which won him so many awards, and now he's abandoned the lush greenery of Mahe for the arid and soulless streets of the nation's capital. And the book is a fascinating departure in that sense from the oeuvre that he was famous for. It is, as he himself has revealed, very reflective of his own experience coming here as a 21-year-old in 1962. His protagonist comes to Delhi as a 20-year-old in 1959. And obviously it's the same experiences that he experienced, that his characters go through, the major historical events of the city's evolution during Mukundanji's time here, the war with China in 1962, the Indo-Pakistan wars of 65 and 71, the emergency of 75, and the Sikh riots of 84. And therefore, the story is very much that of an observer of the city's turbulent evolution for nearly 4 decades, from an overgrown provincial city with cauliflower and wheat fields, as you mentioned, overcome by refugees and stark poverty, acquiring the trappings of authority as a national capital to the gleaming prosperity of today. And it's above all the story of the Malayali community of Delhi, the struggling professionals amongst them, and the way in which they're impacted by these events. It's striking that Mukundan is interested principally in the unfortunates, not the success stories. In the novel, there's a reference to one character, George Kutty, who's made it big, but he's not a character the reader really gets to know. And when, the Krishna Menons or Kunhikrishnans of politics, the KPS Menons or TKN Nayars of bureaucracy, the Madhavan Kuttis or George Verghese of journalism, the George Muthuts or Rajan Pillais of business, the big Malayali names that most refer to when thinking of the community of Keralites in the national capital, these are never mentioned nor even fictionally reinvented. Theirs are not the stories that interest the author. So instead, there's a crusading journalist, his unhappy wife who wants a child, the eccentric artist who wanders about indifferent to all social and personal niceties, but is brimming with precocious talent, the call girl, the visiting school teacher, the bespectacled scholar activist at JNU, the widow eking out her existence as a peon in the Secretariat. Amazing. And as you said, Resh, yourself, his strength as an author is as a great teller of stories. He unveils you into the lives of his characters with an eye for the telling detail. And he feelingly portrays the concerns and struggles of the ordinary lower middle class characters, recounting their struggles and yearnings in painful detail. With a great consciousness of the fragility of life. It's interesting that Mukundan mentioned today his fondness for tragedy, because that comes across very much. A lot of people, characters minor and major in the book. And there's a lot of the seamy side of life in the city, the smells, the dust and dirt, the omnipresent excreta, the injustices and the daily horrors that make the very challenge of survival for the city's residents an ordeal. But that's what, in a sense, makes it such an unsparing portrait. And I think that in many ways, it's a book without equals as a portrait of Delhi and of the diaspora Malayali community within it. I think it's a compelling and absorbing read, by a master storyteller at the height of his powers. I really wish it all success.
Thank you, Dr. Tharoor.
Thank you.
So this event is also special in another way, because this is a joint translation, the work of two translators, and also this is the first published translation from Malayalam for Nandakumar. So congratulations for that. I read that your love for translations began with a paper on fishes, and now you've just finished a huge huge project of a classic in Malayalam. So how was the journey so far? Your mic is...
I had muted myself so that, the external sounds don't come in. It was great, actually. One of the things with Mukundan was the simplicity of his language. I mean, I remember when I sent the first draft, he called me and said, Nandin, this word, petrichor, do you think people will, so because for that smell of the new soil as rains come in, and then, so he was very, very careful about his language, that it has to reach everybody. So finally, I had to persuade him, Mukundan, that is the word, let us use it. And then there was thing about Hessian. So use of Hessian to build the shacks and all that. He said, can we just use jute? Do you really want to use Hessian? So I had to, make do with that. And it was a great experience. And Fathima was there. And great,
so how was it working together? How did you divide the work? Or
I did a first draft, she polished it, and that is how it went through. So,
All right. So, like when I read Delhi, something that really stood out to me were the food descriptions. There's a lot of food being made, food being cooked, food being shared. And through these simple acts of, cooking and eating, there is a strong subtext in these small events. Like, for example, there was a time when Vidya is a young girl. She's standing at the roadside and looking at the chaat and golgappas, and which her friends are having, but she knows she is poor, and you understand the difference between her and her friends. And there was another passage about cooking dried fish. So the people in the building, the residents in the government quarters, they are mostly upper caste people. But then it is said that they are so poor, so the smell did not affect them as much, which is such a powerful statement, especially now in this present political climate, where everything, even food, is being politicized. So what do you think about it? Anybody can take it. Anybody can answer. Fatima, would you like to start?
Yeah. In fact, when we decided to translate the book, I actually thought that a lot of it was, erroneously thought that a lot of it was nostalgia, Malayali nostalgia about living in Delhi, and wondered whether that would actually translate into, it would carry across, and whether there was any point in doing it. And actually, we wanted to, and also the book is big, so I told Mukundan, and Mukundan also agreed with me. We may rather cut a bit of it so that more readers would be tempted to buy the book, because people prefer to buy smaller books, not long, big narratives. So, but then Nandan was absolutely against it. So was Kartika. So we left it to Kartika for editing it. And the nostalgia is all about, how do you recreate Malayali life in Delhi, in your locale in Delhi.
And there's a lot of sharing your food, which is like, an Indian sentiment. We love sharing food with others, right?
Yeah.
So this novel, it's set 60 years ago. But when you read it now in 2020, you cannot help noticing the similarities, because the religious intolerance, the violence against minorities, and even social evils like the dowry system then rules like who can love whom, those kind of rules. Everything seems same as what is happening right now. So it kind of feels like we are not moving forward as a society. We are just rolling in same place, and it feels kind of disorienting. Did you feel that, Dr. Tharoor?
Um, there's a lot about the book that is anchored in a particular time and place, and obviously, I think that the historical events and the personal dramas of the characters merge together in the reader's experience of the book. So for me, the human details stuck a little more because the historical details were so familiar. I preferred not to see echoes for today. For example, there is very little in terms of the rise of Hindutva in the book. That is not, for example, a theme, because the character's experience of Delhi is in a period in which there were other things that strike him as more important. There is one episode in which a Muslim character is abused by a Hindu landlord when he's visiting a friend's house that he's staying in. It was a rental property, and he gets thrown out. And that casts a shadow, if you like, that echoes today's situation. So there's hint of it. But for me, if I were to look at things about the book, I would really much more remember the individual characters and experiences, the sufferings of ordinary people that struggle to survive. The college-going girl whose footwear is tattered and frequently mended. The office goer wearing the same shirt day after day because that's all he can afford. The sea carpenter who cannot save enough for a dowry for his daughters. The pavement bower whose livelihood is destroyed in an emergency cleanup drive. The young woman whose widowhood and poverty lead men to assume she must be available for the night. I mean, all these are the sort of human insights that stay with the reader. And I would say that my impression is that that's what the book intends the reader principally to derive. I mean, there are these big historical events, you're right, but you notice there are no melodramatic flourishes. Even when events of great dramatic import are being narrated, there's very little by way of action sequences. Even these frequent deaths we've talked about mainly take place off stage. The details of their often grisly endings are essentially omitted. And there's some beautiful writing about it, don't get me wrong. I remember the scene, for example, at the end of the anti-Sikh riots in '84, heartrending events that affect some of the key characters in the book. And as two survivors walk hand in hand through the smoldering ruins with the stench of death in their nostrils, trying to draw strength from each other, there's a line in the book that says, Delhi appeared to them like a huge painting made with blood. So it's a shall we say, a poetic, literary way of summarizing a larger set of issues than an anatomizing of historical detail as such. It's the human detail. I'll give you one more example. During the emergency, for example, there's a moment in the book when a 62-year-old man is dragged off to a vasectomy camp and is left to bleed after a botched operation, flung on the road. And as the blood seeps from between his legs, the author caustically writes, the emergency had given the consumptive old man the gift of menstruation. Now, I mean, these are the things that remain, it seems to me. And that's precisely what separates a novel like Mukundan's from a journalistic tract. In fact, I would say that as somebody who's written about some of the same periods and some of the same events in my fiction, I would say that my approach actually is much less emotionally effective than what Mukundan Chaitan has done, because he's actually brought these things to life at an intimate human level. And the big historical events are happening to characters you've got to know and care for as flesh and blood human beings. Those are the things that stay in my mind.
Fatima, would you like to add something? Or Nandakumar?
No, that was from, oh, sorry. Go ahead, Fatima.
Yeah. For me, the novel is because both Mukundan and Nandan are familiar with Delhi. I've only had brief stays, brief visits, and briefly stayed in Delhi. So for me, it was like Delhi was being translated for me as well. So I'm fundamentally a reader of this biography of Delhi, and it is incisive, as Dr. Tharoor pointed out. It's it's almost as if history is refracted through fiction, and that's when the gaps are filled, and the gaps are filled by people who are on the ground, people who are victims, people who are on the margins, and the narrator is someone who is self-conscious about becoming a writer. So he is walking through Delhi, flowing through the crowd, feeling the urgency, the pulse of the crowd, and also often he's an actor as well as an observer, and that's what is fantastic about the book. And you get to know a Delhi which you never ever knew about. So in that way, it was a revealing experience for me as well, a learning curve for me as well.
Mm-hmm. So, on a lighter note, this novel was like a timestamp for me, because reading it in this year, 2020, and reading things like this isn't a question; it's just a comment. Reading things like aluminium vessels were difficult to source in Kerala. And people from Delhi, they used to bring aluminium vessels for cooking and woolen clothes for their friends and relatives and all that. It's so fascinating. Like, I cannot imagine that such an era existed, or such a period existed. And it's a time when, having a radio is like a status symbol. Everyone doesn't have a radio. Then getting a phone, you have to be on a list, and only if you're lucky enough or you have enough recommendations, then you get the phone. But compared to that, now our life is really easy. At the touch of buttons, we have everything. And
if you can afford it, Rish.
Oh yes, that's a very good point. Yes. And also this train journey that happens from Kerala to Delhi.
Via Madras.
Yeah, via Madras. And by the time you reach Delhi, you're covered in dust and soot, and you are so hungry. I really like that train journey part a lot, because I've done a lot of train journeys myself. So it was really, really fascinating for me. Was it a nostalgic, read for you, Nandakumar and Shreedharanunni?
Yeah, with me, my first journey to Delhi was more or less the same. 82 was in that thing. Passing through Andhra, I mean, I was traveling second class, of course. So I had a couple of friends with me. We went and sat in front of the AC, cabin, and through the Louvre, we got a little bit of, cool air coming. So yeah, there are so many things which was nostalgic in that way. Plus, since I'd lived in Delhi, it helped me a lot when I was translating this thing, the book.
So you were familiar with the place and the people.
Yes, I was in Delhi from 82 onwards, till I moved out of.
Right. So a quick reminder to the audience. We'll be winding up the session soon. So if you have any questions to any of the panel members, please leave it in the comments and we'll take it in a few minutes. Right? So this is my last question. So the novel has such a vast array of characters. I think some 25 to 30 characters who have a proper function. Some of them are major characters, some are minor, but they have a proper function in the novel. And all of them have very distinct voices. As Dr. Tharoor pointed out, there's a journalist, there's an activist, there is a prostitute, there's a painter, a widow, so many different kinds of characters. So, do you have a favorite character? Is there a character that stayed in your mind? All of you have to answer this question.
Well, all the characters stayed in my mind because they're very memorably and vividly portrayed. I must say, I didn't like the principal character because I found him a somewhat aimless young man. I think, constantly engaged in these conversations with himself, seemingly unmotivated to succeed, to make money, to develop a career. acquire a wife, establish a permanent home. Nothing like the Malayalis I have known, who are all go-getters and determined to climb to the top. But the thing about Sahadevan is, of course, he is meant to be a character on whom, if you like, all the issues of the novel can be projected, and who is intelligent enough and a shrewd enough observer to make very interesting observations. And that's the main thing about him. So, for example, one of the comments early on in the book that stayed with me because it's so striking is when Sahadevan's early disillusionment with what he sees in Delhi, while he's drifting across it, he doesn't seem to be doing anything very purposeful. He's drifting across the city, but he's disillusioned. And he thinks if material comforts had been the purpose of life, I'd have gone back to Kerala, he thinks, because there the only two problems are unemployment and poverty. And even if there was poverty, there was cleanliness and hygiene. Even if there was hunger, people were socially conscious. At least in Kerala, we have that. In Delhi, we have none of that. It was a very interesting observation. But of course, he still stays on. And he stays on through all the evolution and so on. And I don't want to give away the ending of the novel. But that really, I wanted to go and kick the fellow because obviously, he, according to Mukundan Jaital, he has written this masterpiece, having spent 40 years essentially living it and dreaming it, and then he has given all the credit to Mukundan Jaital, which is a very disappointing thing for this character to do. So the character that I want to object to strongly is Sahadevan, because I find him so completely frustrating to relate to as the principal protagonist. But at the same time, I have to tell you, he carries the novel as precisely because he is not depicted as such a definitive, successful, thrusting, rising character. Mukundan Jaital is able to paint, as it were, or all the issues, project all the issues onto.
And it's also wonderful how he finds a new family in Delhi, a new community, a group of friends and acquaintances, whereas his sisters are complaining and writing letters that he's not sending money or he's not being in touch and all that.
That's right. And it's never very clear. He experiences a lot of guilt about his sisters. Why he doesn't do more is difficult to understand. I mean, he starts off, of course, as a protege of the communist trade unionist Shreedharanunni. He's a very interesting character, but who dies within the first few pages of the book. So, and then, of course, I think the reason that he arrives in Delhi 3 years before the author actually did is to give that period to acquire this family. So that then becomes the family he hangs on to, as it were, throughout the following 4 decades. I was very struck, by the way, with talking about YM, because he clearly is showing the impact of having been a French cultural attaché for all his years in Delhi, because that's where the red wine comes in. I will say that obviously none of his characters seems to enjoy that life. There is a reference to an embassy, but it's not the French, it's the Rwandan and an African embassy. I thought it was a Rwandan one. And what was interesting about that too was that his familiarity with the embassy life in Delhi could have spawned a totally different set of stories or characters, but he chose not to go there. And one day in private, I'm going to ask him why.
Maybe we'll soon get another story based on all that, those experiences. Mukundan sir, we're waiting for you to write that story.
Another one.
So this is really quite an unfair question to ask to Mukundan sir, because I'm sure you love all the characters. But did your novel start with Sahadevan? Who was the first character that came to mind? Since Dr. Tharoor,
I wanted to write about myself. That was the
okay.
Yeah, but then I don't like autobiography. I don't want to talk about myself. So what I try to create a character which resembles me a little bit. I'm very happy.
You're far more purposeful, sir.
Life I would have had, but unfortunately I couldn't. But that is my ideal Mukundan. You see,
Sahadevan is your ideal.
I failed. I couldn't do. This is what the writers do usually. If they can't do something, well, they create a character accordingly. So he's my ideal character. I would like to have to say a word about the narration. That was the problem I faced in the beginning, because so many events, so many characters, and a long period. How to squeeze all this into a novel? And I didn't want to write for the intellectuals. Sorry, but I wanted the ordinary people to read my novel and respond. So I was looking for a style, a narrative which is simple, which can go straight to the heart of the readers. That's how I decided to write with restraint, and I stripped my narrative of all flourishes and made it very simple. And I was usually I write like that. Even my novel, well-known novel, my Tiranga, is also written in a simple language. Um, so to find a suitable narrative, I had to spend some time, to think about it. And I think I don't know whether I have succeeded, but most of the people say that it's good. It's good that I wrote in simple language. I could write in complicated language also. I have done it, uh, but in this novel, because I really want the people, ordinary people, to read it. This should go straight to their heart. I'm not
Yes.
against the intellectuals. Well, you said that in the beginning, Resh, that it's for different kinds of readers. So everybody can read it. Well, that's it about the narrative. Mm.
What about you, Nandakumar? Do you have a character that really stayed close to your heart?
Uh, probably Devi for her self. Probably Devi for her self-sacrificing, and the trouble she went through to bring up her children. Yeah.
And Fatima?
Rosily.
Rosely. The Rosely is a
Yeah,
very interesting character, actually.
because she's resilient and she goes through really difficult times, but then she puts up with it and she succeeds in what she has come to do,
Yeah,
and she
and
goes
she's
back.
very clear in her aim. Like, this
Yeah,
is what I want to do. I really like Rosely, yeah. Rosely
very
is a nice character.
sensitive.
My favorite is Lalitha.
And Lalitha is also good.
Yeah, I really like how her arc went. Like, first she's this meek, pavam, we can say pavam wife, housewife, and then there's this part where she goes to a god man because she wants a child, and I really liked how her story went.
But I don't think you should give away the evolution of the character, because that's
Yes,
part of
yes,
the
yes, yes, yes.
joy of the.
Yeah.
So some of the difficulty here is that when you discuss a character over a sprawling book over some
Yes.
decades, you would
It's
be a
difficult
spoiler
to be
to say what happens to some of them. Yeah, I would say that the thing we should pay credit to the author for is for having created such memorable characters who are so true to life. You really feel you could have met these people.
exactly.
They're absolutely real. And I think that's a tribute to the author's imagination and to his way of expressing the reality of their lives in the kind of detail that makes it credible.
And very
You know,
distinct voices as well.
absolutely. I mean, very distinct concerns. Voices, how would you say, Resh? Because I didn't find any stylistic difference in the way any of them spoke. It's more their life experiences and their conduct
Like
and their
when
reaction.
Rosely is
Yeah.
speaking, it's Rosely. And Lalitha, she's an entirely different character. The way she speaks, the way she interacts with others, it's different. You don't feel that? Oh, at least.
Well, I mean, to me, that wasn't the way it came across. But every reader brings something of their own sensibilities and prejudices to the books they read. I will say that I liked Rosely very much as a character, and very much liked the ending for her, but I won't give it away. Whereas the artist character, for example, is a totally different experience for the reader. But I really think that we should encourage people to read the book and not make it not deprive them of the joys of discovering what happens to these
Give away
fascinating people.
spoilers.
He's my
Right.
favorite, one of my favorite characters. I mean, the painter, Vasu.
Yes.
He does not care about anything. He does not.
Yeah.
And in fact, I thought one of the most impressive things that Sahadevan does is to find out who this boy's father is and keep him updated that his son is alive and well and doing all this stuff, which the son will not bother to do, and the son doesn't even know Sahadevan is doing. And I thought that was a very interesting sidelight into the character Sahadevan. The authorial alter ego that Mukundan has told us that Sahadevan is, had some redeeming features, and that was one of them.
It's a very Malayali thing to do.
But you will notice every time in the book that Sahadevan is described writing or trying to write, nothing comes of it. So it is a bit of a revelation that you find out that he has been writing. Anyway, again, I don't want to give it all away.
Right, he should have taken that wine.
Wine, yeah. I was also thinking maybe.
So we'll move on.
His taste in alcohol is specified. It's not wine.
We'll move on to some questions from the audience. Fatima, there's one for you. Can you explain what was your biggest challenge when you started this translation?
Mine was, personally, it was time for me, because I was reluctant to take it on because I was hard pressed for time at that point of time. It was because Nandan kept telling me to take it up that we finally agreed to start it. And for me, it was biggest challenge definitely would be to bring the Mahi. I'm also from Mahi, so for me, because the Delhi part was taken care of by Nandan. He knows more about Delhi, and Mukundan was constantly pitching in. So for me, what was left for me mostly is about how you can recreate the Kerala Malayali-ness which you live in, which is there in Mahi. So mine was about the dialect, typical colloquial usages that we use. Things that we are familiar with, we've lived with. And so for me, it was quite easy to relate to that. And perhaps that is my greatest contribution to that. The tone, looking at the tone, to change the tone and the rhythm. I focus on the tone and the rhythm more than anything else, because if you don't get it right, you don't get it right in literary translation.
Right. There's a question to Shashi Tharoor. It's not about the book, it's about the reading habit. So, sir, reading is a habit which needs to be an art. How do you think a reading habit can be made into an art?
I don't see that. I think reading is a source of pleasure. Of course, art can also and should also be a source of pleasure. For me, the pleasure that reading gives is essentially to actually lend meaning and magic to each moment as it passes, which is what you seek, what every one of us seeks out of everything we do in life. Whether you are meeting a friend or watching a cricket match or going to the cinema or writing a book or a story, or whether you're reading, the whole purpose is that each of your waking hours should have some meaning and depth imparted to it, that it's not just a meaningless moment passing by. And is that art? I mean, I suppose Walter Pater, the great theorist of art from the 19th century, would tell you that that's the value of art as well. To that degree, reading is art. But I would also argue that if you just read for your own pleasure, if you read because reading gives you a kind of joy, that other activities give you different kinds of joy, and reading gives you that joy, then it's worth doing. As we get older and busier and have work responsibilities and family responsibilities, it becomes more difficult. So you need to have that commitment to reading to keep it going. There is no doubt that even my own sons, who are writers themselves, find it easier at the end of a long day to plonk themselves in front of the TV set and watch a film, because that's a more passive form of entertainment. Everything is imagined and enacted and recited for you, and you can just sit back and have the story unfold rather than having to engage with the page, which is what writing requires. But I would say that it's a different kind of pleasure and satisfaction. I would urge more people to take up the habit. Otherwise, writers like Mukundan and myself would really be in trouble if readers became extinct. So I hope there'll be more of them. It's always been a minority pursuit throughout history. Reading has been a pursuit of a minority, whether you call it an educated elite or whether you just call it a smaller section of society. And even today, I would argue that despite the proliferation of all the other means of distraction and entertainment available to them, there is a minority that holds on to the book, and so we have to be conscious we're writing for them. But by writing for them, we are also writing something that we hope will spread ideas, stories, engagements, issues, values into the rest of society.
Okay. Nandakumar, there's a question for you. It's about whether you were inspired by your grandfather, Mahakavi.
Well, unfortunately, I am not as what should I say, proficient in Malayalam as I'm in English. So, although I have studied Malayalam, learned his poetry, I can't say I've been inspired because I've never met him. I was born a year after he died. So, yes, I guess there is something in him, something from him that I've inherited. I hope so. So, to that extent, yes.
There's one more question for the translators. How difficult or easy was the process of getting into Mukundan sir's mind while doing the translation?
Who should answer?
Okay, Fatima, you can start.
This I think is quite, as Mukundan has already mentioned, he uses a very simple narrative. Our job was to make sure that the simplicity is maintained throughout. The style is pared down. It is simple enough. And we both, I think, as translators, we both are quite aware of. We've been working together for a long time. We've helped each other with our earlier translations, so we're quite familiar with what are our strengths and weaknesses. So, in that sense, we knew that for myself, I knew that I had to pare down. My job was to do that. Look at, Nandan would give the very solid first draft, completed draft, and we work on it, and I worked along with Mukundan as well.
Did it involve a lot of iterations to get that simplicity?
That Mukundan will have to say. We won't fight about this, but we agree about the general tenor, foregrounding of the text, which is the most important thing, to have as close an approximation as possible as far as the translation is concerned.
Right. So I think it's time to end the session. So thank you for being such a
Let me
wonderful
just say on that,
Right.
if I may, Resh, that
Yes.
one thing one should reassure the listeners, potential readers, is that book doesn't read like a translation. It reads very fluently, very fluidly, and there is no awkwardness. When I think back of the translations of Malayalam novels that I struggled with as a kid, who hadn't been in Kerala studied, had to read these novels in English, and most of the translations were pretty clunky. And having to explain every cultural reference, every second word. That is not that. This is a very fluidly translated book, and my compliments to the translators. Whether it helped them that the author himself knows the language into which you're translating. That must be an asset, because obviously that both helps you and limits you, as Nandakumar was explaining earlier. When he's translated into a language he doesn't know, he can't interfere with the translators as much as he must have been able to do with you. But having said that, it reads very well, and my compliments to both of you.
In fact, one of the reasons why I came into translation was this. I read a few Malayalam to English translations. Then I thought, God, I can do better than this. I really it's an old story about Harold Robbins. Harold Robbins, who read a script and said, "Look, I can write better than you." and that is how he started writing. I think what was his first book? That was out of a bet like this. So,
Fatima, you were saying?
I would disagree, because I think quite a lot of whatever we do now is also because a lot of translators have come before us. They've sort of, paved the ground for us to come. And a lot of things that we take for granted, like using Indian words, like quite a lot of Indian words that we take for granted, we continue using that because others have come before us. And I think translation scene is actually becoming better and better. Such wonderful, gifted translators are coming up, and I'm sure that the Malayalam translation scene is absolutely going to be different in the future.
No, it's undoubtedly very much better, no doubt about it. But there was only one choice you made that I quarreled with on that very subject, since you mentioned it. It's that lovely bit in the early part of the book when Sahadevan's mother urges him, when you go to Delhi, you should go to Nehru's house and meet him, but don't go there wearing a munda. Who wrote that? Don't go there wearing a dhoti. And I thought, who would say dhoti in Kerala? No one would say after you get trousers. So the meaning was clear. Had you said munda instead of dhoti, it would have been more authentic, and the meaning would have been clear, because the next sentence says go only after you get trousers. So the reader who doesn't know what a munda is would have realized it must be a dhoti. That's why I thought that that was a choice that I would not have wanted you to make, and I'm sorry that Mukundan, with his eagle eye, let you get away with
it. Point taken. Point taken.
But anyway, it's such an excellent translation, really. 100% excellent translation. So I think we'll wrap up the session now. So thank you. Thank you for being such a wonderful audience. I hope the session was intriguing enough to inspire you to pick up a copy. No, it's nice and big and it's chunky, and it's really the best way you can end the year with. And if you have friends or a book club or something, definitely pick this book, because there's so much to discuss, so many characters, so many different things to discuss. You'll love this book. It's one of my favorites of the year. Fantastic book. And I hope you all will pick a copy soon. So yeah, that's it. Thank you, Westland and BC, for hosting the event. Thank you, all of you for coming.
Thank you, all of you. Yeah. Thank you, Resh.
That's all right. Thank you. Bye.
Bye. And bye.
Bye. Udata, bye.
Bye. Everybody.
Go in the sticker.
Okay.
അടിയന്തരാവസ്ഥ നിരോധനങ്ങളുടെ അവസ്ഥ കൂടിയായിരുന്നു. ബസ്സുകൾ കൃത്യമായി ഓടുന്നു എന്നു മാത്രമല്ല, എല്ലാവരും കയറുന്നതുവരെ കണ്ടക്ടർ വിസിലടിച്ച് ബസ് വിടാതെ ക്ഷമയോടെ കാത്തുനിൽക്കുന്നു. കാൽമുട്ടുകൾക്ക് വേദനയുള്ളവരെയും കാഴ്ചക്കുറവുള്ളവരെയും ബസ്സിൽ കയറാൻ മറ്റുള്ളവർ സഹായിക്കുന്നു. സദാ മുട്ടിയും ഉരുമിയും സ്ത്രീകളെ ശല്യപ്പെടുത്തിയിരുന്ന പെൺകൊന്തന്മാർ സ്ത്രീകളിൽ നിന്നും മാറി അകലെ ആദരവോടെ നിൽക്കുന്നു. ഇപ്പോൾ യാത്രക്കാർക്ക് ഇടയ്ക്കിടെ സ്വന്തം കീശ തപ്പിനോക്കി പേഴ്സും പണവുമെല്ലാം അവിടെ തന്നെയുണ്ടെന്ന് ഉറപ്പുവരുത്തേണ്ടതില്ല. പോക്കറ്റടിക്കാർ മുഴുവൻ ഒറ്റയടിക്ക് ഓഫീസുകളിലും പാൽബുത്തുകളിലും റേഷൻ പീടികകളിലും ഇലക്ട്രിസിറ്റി ഓഫീസുകളിലെ ബിൽ പേയ്മെന്റ് കൗണ്ടറുകളിലും ആളുകൾ അച്ചടക്കത്തോടെ ക്യൂ നിൽക്കുന്നു. പവർ കട്ടില്ല. കറണ്ട് പോയാൽ ഒന്ന് ഫോൺ വിളിക്കുകയേ വേണ്ടൂ. ലൈൻമാൻ ഓടിയെത്തുകയായി. പെൺപിള്ളേർ മുട്ടോളം എത്താത്ത ഇറക്കം കുറഞ്ഞ ഫ്രോക്കിട്ട് നടന്നാലും ആരും നോക്കുകയോ കമന്റ് അടിക്കുകയോ ഇല്ല. പാർക്കുകളിൽ നിന്നും സിനിമാ ടാക്കീസുകളിൽ നിന്നും കോളേജ് പരിസരങ്ങളിൽ നിന്നും പൂവാലന്മാർ തിരോധാനം ചെയ്തു. പതിവായി 5-6 മണിക്കൂറുകൾ വൈകിയെത്തുന്ന കേരള എക്സ്പ്രസും ഗ്രാൻഡ് ട്രങ്ക് എക്സ്പ്രസും കിറുകൃത്യമായി പ്ലാറ്റ്ഫോമുകളിൽ വന്നു നിൽക്കുന്നു. സെക്രട്ടേറിയറ്റിൽ സ്റ്റാഫ് അംഗങ്ങളുടെ ഹാജർ 100%. വ്യാജ ഡോക്ടർമാർ ക്ലിനിക് അടച്ച് സ്ഥലം വിട്ടു. ദരിയാഗഞ്ചിലെ മോത്തി മഹലിലും പണ്ടാര റോഡിലെ റെസ്റ്റോറന്റുകളിലും കടായി ചിക്കൻ കറിയിൽ കൃത്രിമ ചുവപ്പ് വർണ്ണം ചേർക്കാതെയായി. ചാന്ദിനി ചൌക്കിൽ നിന്നും സ്മഗിൾഡ് ഗുഡ്സുകൾ അപ്രത്യക്ഷമായി. ഇന്ദിരാ മിസ്ട്രസ് കയ്യിൽ വടിയുമായി നിന്ന് നഗരവാസികളെ അച്ചടക്കം പഠിപ്പിക്കുകയാണ്. അവർ രാജ്യത്തെ ഒരു LP സ്കൂളാക്കി മാറ്റി. പ്രജകൾ കുട്ടികളായി ക്ലാസ്സിലിരുന്നു. അവർ ടീച്ചറെ അനുസരിച്ചു. അനുസരിക്കാത്തവർക്ക് നല്ല ശിക്ഷ കിട്ടുകയും ചെയ്തു. കുഞ്ഞികൃഷ്ണനും സത്യനാഥനുമാണ് ഏറ്റവും വലിയ ശിക്ഷ ലഭിച്ചത്. അത് ജീവിതകാലം മുഴുവനും നീണ്ടു നിൽക്കുന്നതായിരുന്നു. സഹദേവൻ ശിക്ഷയിൽ നിന്ന് കഷ്ടിച്ചു രക്ഷപ്പെട്ടു. എല്ലാവരും ശിക്ഷ അനുഭവിച്ചാൽ അവരെക്കുറിച്ച് ആരാണ് എഴുതുക? അയാൾ സ്വയം ചോദിച്ചു. ടു റൈറ്റ് എ നോവൽ ഈസ് ടു ലിവ് ഔട്ട്സൈഡ് വൺസെൽഫ്. ആരാണത് പറഞ്ഞത്? പേരോർക്കാൻ കഴിയാത്ത ഒരു മഹത് സാഹിത്യകാരൻ പറഞ്ഞത്. അടിയന്തരാവസ്ഥക്കാലത്ത് എഴുതിയ അധ്യായത്തിൽ സഹദേവൻ ആ വാചകങ്ങൾ ഉദ്ധരണിയായി ചേർത്തിരുന്നു. അടിയന്തരാവസ്ഥ തുടങ്ങിയിട്ടേയുള്ളൂ, എന്തൊക്കെയാണ് ഈ സംഭവിക്കാന്ന് ആർക്കറിയാം? അയാൾ അണഞ്ഞുപോയ പൈപ്പ് വീണ്ടും കത്തിച്ചു. അയാളിപ്പോൾ തുടർച്ചയായി പൈപ്പ് വലിക്കുകയാണ്. വായിൽ നിന്ന് പൈപ്പ് ഒഴിഞ്ഞ നേരമില്ല. അയാൾക്കിപ്പോൾ അത് മറ്റൊരവയവമോ ഇന്ദ്രിയമോ ആണ്. നമ്മളെന്തിനാ പേടിക്കണത് കുഞ്ഞികൃഷ്ണേട്ടാ? നമ്മള് പാർട്ടിക്കാരല്ലല്ലോ. പാർട്ടിക്കാരല്ലേ പേടിക്കേണ്ടതുള്ളൂ. നന്നായി നമ്മളൊരു പാർട്ടിയിലും ചേരാത്തത്. എത്രയോ കാലമായി കുഞ്ഞികൃഷ്ണന്റെ ഉള്ളിൽ ഒരു പാർട്ടിയുണ്ട്. ലളിതയ്ക്ക് അതറിയില്ല. കല്ലിക്കണ്ടി കുഞ്ഞിക്കണ്ണൻ മാസ്റ്റർ ജാനകിക്കുട്ടിയെയും കൊണ്ട് അയാളുടെ അരികിൽ വന്നത് അതുകൊണ്ടാണ്. ഉള്ളിൽ അങ്ങനെ ഒരു പാർട്ടിയെ കൊണ്ടു നടക്കുന്നതിന് അയാൾക്ക് വളരെ വലിയൊരു വില കൊടുക്കേണ്ടി വരും.